My name is Myra Anderson. I'm 31 years old. And earlier this year, my parents rang my doorbell for the first time in 13 years. They were not there to apologize. My mother stepped into my hallway, smiled like no time had passed at all, and said, "Your brother starts college next year. Give him this apartment so he can get used to it." My father stood behind her, nodding like this was the most reasonable request in the world. So I answered, "Or you could kick him out like you did to me and let him figure it out himself." My mother called me heartless. My father called me ungrateful. My brother texted me that same night to say I owed them. But here's what none of them knew. 1 week later, a clerk at the county recorder's office would slide 2 pages across a counter toward me, and my quiet little family would never survive what was printed on them. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This channel is where quiet people finally tell the family stories they kept to themselves for years and where boundaries get the last word. If you've ever been told you owe your family everything, this one is for you. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this ends. Let me back up to that Saturday morning. 9 a.m. 2 knocks, then the bell. I opened the door and there they were. My mother, Sharon, held a plate of banana bread like a peace treaty. My father, Frank, had his arms crossed before he even said hello. 13 years of silence, and they walked in like they had been over for dinner last week. My mother toured my living room with her eyes. She priced the couch. She priced the curtains. Then she got to it. "It just makes sense, honey. You're alone here. 2 bedrooms for 1 person. Dylan needs a real start." I asked where I was supposed to live. She waved a hand like the question was rude. "You could rent something small. You're used to hard times." He isn't. My father finally spoke, and it was an order, not a request. "Your brother starts college next year. This is what the family needs from you." The family. That word did something to my spine. I thought about the last thing this family needed from me 13 years ago and what it had cost. So, I kept my voice level and said it, "Or you could kick him out like you did to me and let him figure it out himself." The banana bread hit my counter with a thud. My mother's eyes filled on cue, right on schedule, tears at the ready like she kept them in her purse. "How can you be so selfish, Myra? It's just an apartment." My father pointed a finger at my face and told me my mother had sacrificed everything for me. I opened the door for them. That night, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't know. "This is Dylan. Mom's right. You owe us." You're probably wondering what I meant at the door. So, here is the part of the story I don't tell people. I grew up in Cedar Falls, Ohio, the first child of Frank and Sharon Anderson. My brother Dylan came along when I was 14. 2 weeks after my high school graduation, I came home from my shift at the diner and found boxes on the front porch. My boxes. My clothes, my books, my yearbook, packed by someone else's hands and stacked by the door like a donation drop. My mother stood on the steps with her arms folded. I asked what was happening, and she said the sentence I have heard in my head for 13 years, "We can only afford one future." I remember laughing because I thought it had to be a joke. It wasn't. My father came out and explained, calm as a man reading a receipt, that I was 18 now, legally an adult, and legally they were done. My old bedroom was already becoming a study room for Dylan. He was 4. He needed space to grow, my mother said. Room for his little desk, his little books, his big future. I asked where I was supposed to sleep that night. Nobody answered. Here's the detail that still gets me. That same month, while I was sleeping in my car behind the diner, my parents put a down payment on a new truck. They weren't broke. They had simply done the math, and I had been rounded down. By the end of that week, my mother had taken my photos off the stairway wall. Every one of them. Somebody at church asked her about me once, and she said I'd run off on my own. That was the story. But there was one person in town who knew better. My grandfather, Walter Anderson, was my father's father, and he was everything my father was not. He was 69 that summer, a retired carpenter with sawdust in his flannel and a handshake like a vice. When he heard where I'd been sleeping, he drove his pickup to the diner, put my boxes in the bed without a word, and took me to his house on Maple Street. I stayed in his spare room for 8 months. He never once made me feel like charity. He made me feel like family, which by then felt rarer. Every morning, he'd tap the kitchen table and say the same thing while I sorted my paychecks and bills into envelopes. Paper remembers what people forget. Myra. Keep every receipt of your life. He was furious with my father. I heard him on the phone one night, his voice low and hard. A man who empties his daughter's room hasn't got a son's name coming to anything of his. My mother's response was to keep Dylan away from him. She told the family Walter had chosen sides. He had, and he never apologized for it. One evening, he found me crying over a community college application I couldn't afford, and he slid it back across the table with a check paper-clipped to the corner. "This is a loan," he said, "at 0%, payable in visits." Then he looked around that little house, at the workshop out back and the oak floors he'd laid himself, and said something I filed away as an old man being kind. "This house will keep you safe someday, sweetheart." The next 13 years are the part of my life I'm actually proud of. So forgive me if I linger a minute. I waited tables at night and took classes in the morning. Community college first, then a state school, one course at a time, paying cash. It took me 6 years to finish a 4-year accounting degree, and I have never once been embarrassed by that math. I passed my exams, got hired at Hartwell and Boone, a small firm downtown, and worked my way up to senior accountant. I found out I was good at it. Numbers don't play favorites. Numbers don't pack your boxes. A spreadsheet has never once told me it could only afford one future. At 28, I signed my name about 40 times in a title office and walked out the owner of a 2-bedroom condo in the middle of Cedar Falls. I stood in the empty living room that first night with a folding chair and a pizza, and I listened to the deadbolt click. The first door that ever locked on my side. Through all of it, I kept one thread to my old life, Walter. Sunday dinners at Maple Street, pot roast, cribbage, his terrible opinions about my terrible dates. He paid that college money forward in visits, just like he said, until his knees went and then his heart started too. Walter died 3 years ago at 82 in his sleep, in the house he built his life around. At the funeral home, my mother ran everything. She'd appointed herself director of grief. She hugged me in front of everyone long enough for the room to see it and whispered that we should be a family again. Then she steered me to a side table. "Sign the guest book nice and big, honey. You know how Grandpa loved your handwriting." Afterward, she put a stack of blank thank you cards in front of me. "Sign these, too. Just your name. Donna's going to mail them for us." Donna Pruitt was her best friend from church, a soft-spoken woman who did notary work out of her kitchen. I signed the book. I signed the cards. It was a funeral. You don't audit a funeral. A few weeks later, I asked my mother about Walter's estate. She sighed like I'd asked something greedy. "There's nothing, Myra. The estate was all debts. The house had to go to your father to cover the funeral and what Grandpa owed." I was an accountant. It smelled wrong even then. But no court notice came to me because the only address anyone had for me was my parents' house. I had a feeling and no facts. So I filed my doubt away like a receipt I couldn't match yet. It sat in that file for 3 years waiting for a doorbell. Which brings us back to now. After I rejected their demand for my condo, the siege started. 11 missed calls before church. Voice messages with sniffles building to weather systems. Flying monkeys calling, Aunt Linda. Church members sending Bible verses. Dylan showed up at my door, acting entitled, repeating my parents' lies, and making a casual comment that blew everything open. It's not like they're asking for that much. The house money's basically gone. Dad's shop ate all of it. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. First, I drove past Maple Street. A plastic tricycle was in the yard, unfamiliar curtains, a minivan in the driveway. Somebody was renting my grandfather's house. At the county recorder's office, I asked the clerk to pull the property index for Maple Street. 3 years ago, title transferred from the estate of Walter R. Anderson to Frank Anderson as sole owner. And attached to it was a page titled, Disclaimer of Interest. The person disclaiming all rights to Walter's estate was listed as Myra R. Anderson. And above the notary seal sat a signature that was supposed to be mine, notarized by Donna Pruitt on March 14, 3 years ago. Here was the catch. I pulled my records from my closet, 7 years sorted and labeled. In March, 3 years ago, my accounting firm had sent me to a conference in Columbus, 200 miles away. I took everything to Carol Jennings, a probate attorney. We laid the papers side by side. The disclaimer claimed I stood before Donna Pruitt in Cedar Falls on March 14. My records, badge scans, hotel folios, mileage expense reports, and timestamps proving I was 200 miles away asking questions about agricultural depreciation in a hotel ballroom at that exact hour. Carol tapped the papers. This isn't a feeling anymore, Myra. This is provable fraud. That evening, I visited Earl Hobbs, my grandfather's 79-year-old neighbor and best friend. Earl handed me a dovetail cedar box that Walter had made before he died. Inside was a letter in Walter's handwriting, along with a business card for Whitfield Law. The house on Maple Street is yours when I'm gone. Paper remembers, Myra. Carol filed a petition to demand Donna Pruitt's notary journal, subpoena bank logs, and request the master estate file from Whitfield Law's successor firm. Meanwhile, my mother tried to corner me at work with cookies and theatrical tears, trying to publicly shame me. I handed her back the cookies and said, "You may leave the cookies. The performance goes with you." The trap was set. My father called and demanded I attend a family meeting at the end of the month to explain myself or be cut off forever. I agreed to show up. But I wasn't coming to apologize, I was coming with an audit. The family meeting was held at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. Present were my father Frank, my mother Sharon, Dylan, Aunt Linda, Uncle Mark, and 2 family friends who had been fed the story of ungrateful Myra. My mother started her speech, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We've gathered here because Myra has lost her way. Family supports each other. She has a 2-bedroom condo while her brother has no foundation." I waited until she finished. Then, I pulled out a thick black folder from my bag and set it on the dining table. "Before we talk about my condo," I said calmly, "let's talk about March 14, 3 years ago." My mother's face instantly lost its color. My father stood up. "What does 3 years ago have to do with anything? Don't change the subject." 3 years ago, someone forged my signature on a legal disclaimer of interest to steal Grandpa Walter's house, I said, opening the folder. I passed around certified copies to Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark. "Here is the disclaimer signed by me and notarized by your friend Donna Pruitt," I continued. "And here are my hotel records, conference badges, and electronic tolls showing I was 200 miles away in Columbus on that exact day. Furthermore, Donna Pruitt's notary journal has no entry for my driver's license." Aunt Linda gasped as she read the documents. "Sharon. Frank, what is this?" My mother stammered. She must have signed it before she left. We just needed to clear the paperwork for the family." "No," I replied. "You had me sign blank thank you cards at Grandpa's funeral, traced my signature, and had Donna illegally stamp it. You sold his house, used the rental income to fund Dad's business debt, and told everyone Grandpa died penniless." I pulled out the final document, the recovered original will from Whitfield Law. "Grandpa left the house on Maple Street exclusively to me. You didn't just rob me at 18 when you threw me out. You stole my inheritance at 28. My father slammed his hand on the table. "You're going to sue your own parents." I looked him dead in the eye. "You sued my childhood 13 years ago when you put my life in boxes on the porch. I'm just filing the official audit." His legal aftermath was swift and uncompromising. Carol Jennings filed a petition in probate court for forgery, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Facing criminal fraud charges and civil litigation, my father was forced to settle out of court. The title of the house on Maple Street was restored to me, along with all back rent collected over the past 3 years. My parents were forced to sell their custom truck and liquidate personal assets to pay back the stolen equity. Donna Pruitt had her notary license permanently revoked by the state of Ohio and faced administrative fines for official misconduct. Aunt Linda and the rest of the extended family completely cut ties with my parents after the truth came out. Dylan's college fund vanished, Not because I refused to give him my condo, but because my parents' financial web of lies finally collapsed under its own weight. Last month, I walked into the house on Maple Street as its rightful owner. The tenants had moved out, and the house was quiet. I walked into the backyard workshop, ran my fingers over my grandfather's workbench, and smelled the faint, lingering scent of cedar and sawdust. My parents tried texting me one last time, asking for mercy and calling me cruel. I didn't reply. I blocked their numbers. People often ask if blood is thicker than water. But as an accountant, I know the truth. Blood can lie, manipulate, and steal. But paper keeps the ledger balanced. Paper remembers what people try to forget. Thank you for listening to Calm Drama Stories. If you enjoyed this story of justice and firm boundaries, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Until next time, keep your receipts and hold your line.